Hello, it's Jenny Lamorgan with Lean Into Green, and I'm excited to be here with my guest today, Rebecca Spector. She's the West Coast Director for the Center for Food Safety. But before I get into more about how she's going to impact your life, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Lean Into Green for those of you listening for the first time. I'm a green entrepreneur and owner of greenwomanstore.com. And I'm always looking for new ways to go green, and I've learned so much interviewing our green lifestyle experts that I know you're going to be glad that you've joined us. You're going to learn how going green enriches our lives, our health, our wealth, and our happiness in so many important and inspiring ways. So, Leaning Into Green is all about learning from some of the best experts in our field. So I'm here with Rebecca Spector today, and she's going to talk to us about the Center for Food Safety. It's a national nonprofit public interest and environmental advocacy organization working to protect human health and the environment by curbing the use of harmful food production technologies and by promoting organic and other forms of sustainable agriculture. The Center for Food Safety uses legal actions, groundbreaking scientific and policy reports, educational materials, and market pressure using grassroots campaigns. Welcome, Rebecca, and thank you for your very good work on behalf of all of us and our families.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. I think the work that the Center for Food Safety does is so important, so I'm glad to learn more myself and to share some of your good work with everybody. So I believe you have some experience with organic farming. Is that what brought you into issues of food safety?
Yeah, I did run an organic farm for about 10 years, and it was actually prior to that that I became really interested in environmental issues. It was something that I studied in college and soon after college got very interested in. And, while I was interested in general environmental issues, and I'm originally from the East Coast, when I moved out to California, I really saw the intersection between farming and our food production and the environment, and that got me very interested in how those two intersect. So not only how our agriculture affects our environment, but also how it's affecting our health. And as I'm sure you know, that organic farming does not use synthetic pesticides or herbicides, and it's really a very innovative way of producing food. And so it seemed like a logical way for me to get to really work in this field is not only working on it from a policy angle, which is what my educational background is in, but also really getting my hands dirty and working on the farming side and really learning more about how our food is produced and getting involved in that community. So it really was an amazing experience.
And I know that one of the big issues that you work on, and that's certainly in our news a lot right now, is the whole issue of GMOs. And I'm certainly interested in how they affect our health. And I know that you're doing work with GMOs and allergens. Can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between allergens and GMOs?
Sure. Well, as you probably know, genetic engineering of food is a very new way of producing our food. So for thousands of years, farmers and others have definitely bred plants in the same species to make stronger plants that are resistant to disease or to drought. But with genetic engineering, now we have in a laboratory scientists taking genes from one species and putting it into another species. And this is really novel and new, and there are a lot of potential health concerns and also environmental concerns about this new technology. And in terms of allergies, that's definitely one area where there has been a lot of research showing that GMO foods can cause allergies, and it's for several reasons. One is just that the act of genetic engineering in and of itself can create new allergens. And again, that's because we're taking genes from one species like we might be taking a bacteria or a virus and putting it into a completely unrelated species. And these proteins can interact with each other in a way that creates a new allergen. And so that's really an area that there's been some testing. We need much more testing. We really don't know if these new products are causing allergic effects. And another way they can cause allergic effects is if you take one gene, such as a gene from a Brazil nut, and you put it into a soy plant, that can and will cause an allergy. Somebody that's allergic to Brazil nuts would have the allergy if they ate the soy. So that's another reason that allergies can come up during the production of GE foods. So this is definitely an area that a lot of people are concerned about, and it's a really big reason why we think we need labeling of GE foods so that we can trace if people are having allergic reactions to these foods. Because right now we have no way of knowing because the foods aren't labeled.
And the labeling issue has certainly been big here in California, and I think we can take some lessons from many countries around the world now that are actually requiring labeling or banning GMOs altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, at least 64 countries around the world have some form of labeling of genetically engineered foods, and that includes all of the European Union, Russia, Japan, even China. And so a big question on everyone's mind is, here in the U.S., is if 64 countries are labeling these foods, why aren't we labeling them here in the U.S.? And I do think that's caused a lot of outrage amongst consumers.
And there's a lot of myths out there about GMO crops, and it really gets confusing and difficult shopping, certainly. There's not very many foods available that are labeled or that are labeled GMO-free. So can you just go over some of the myths that we might hear that are out there and some of the realities of GMO foods?
Sure. Well, I think, a lot of times we hear that, 80% of our food is genetically engineered, and I think that one thing that's important to remember is that statistic refers primarily to processed foods. So right now, there are really only about 5 major crops that are genetically engineered in our food in the U.S., and that's corn, soy, canola, cotton, and recently some sugar beets, and also recently GE alfalfa, which is mostly used for animal feed. So in terms of the foods that we're actually eating every day, the good news is that whole foods that you would buy in the produce aisle, or rice and beans, those are not genetically engineered. There are some genetically engineered papayas on the market that are from Hawaii, and there may be a little bit of genetically engineered yellow squash, although we're not really seeing that. So the good news is that if you're eating healthy, whole foods, cooking at home, that food is primarily not going to be produced using genetic engineering, and that's the good news. So what we really need to look out for in the supermarket are processed foods that contain a lot of corn and soy. And so, yes, that does include a lot of our cereals, some of our crackers, cookies, chips. And, as we know, a lot of those foods are high in fat content and salt content anyways, so we want to be reducing processed foods in general because of that. So I think in terms of going to the supermarket, the best bet is to buy whole foods. If you can't buy whole foods and you're buying processed foods, to try to avoid products that have soy or corn and listed as their top 3 or 4 ingredients. And you can also buy foods that are labeled organic, as organic foods are not allowed to be produced using genetically engineered crops. And there's also some new labels in the marketplace, such as the Non-GMO Project, which do verify that certain products do not contain GMOs. So the good news is we actually do have some options in the supermarket, although we do still, believe that all products that contain GMOs should be labeled so that consumers have a choice.
And you have a GMO labeling campaign going on now. Can you tell us about it and how we can get involved?
Sure. So there are lots of ways that people that want GMO labeling and want to take action can help. There is federal legislation right now called the Genetically Engineered Food Right to Know Act in Congress, and we are supporting that bill, and a lot of organizations are supporting that bill. So people can go to our website, centerforfoodsafety.org, and they can, through our online action alert system, send an action alert directly to their member of Congress or their senator asking them to support the bill, and that's really important. The good news is, Senator Barbara Boxer here in California is one of the sponsors of the bill, but there are, people that are from other states. Certainly it's really important to get them to pressure and let their legislator know that this is happening. So that's at the federal level. And also at the state level, there are more than 26 states that have introduced GE food labeling bills. And again, you can go to our website and we have that list available. And if you live in a state where there is a bill pending, you can write your state legislator, and ask them to support the bill. And if you're in a state that does not have GE food labeling, you can actually contact Center for Food Safety, and we're happy to help you get started in building a coalition to potentially introduce state legislation. And just so people know, Center for Food Safety, we want federal labeling of GMOs. We think that everyone in the country has the right to know if their foods are produced using genetic engineering, but because the FDA has so far failed to do that, in the interim, we do think that states have the right to introduce these bills until the FDA decides to label them.
So you're working at all levels. You're working at the grassroots level, state, federal, to get these food safety issues proposed and started, and then get the laws changed. So you're working with legislators as well.
Correct. Yes.
And do you find a lot of cooperation at that federal level? It seems like it's really hard to budge.
I'm sorry, cooperation from the legislators?
At the federal level, it seems like we're really having a hard time with the FDA and getting anything moved.
Yeah, definitely the Center for Food Safety, we filed a legal petition with the FDA actually 2 years ago, asking them to, basically demanding that they label GE foods and outlining the legal reasons why we think genetically engineered foods should be labeled. And more than 1.2 million people have written to the FDA in support of our petition saying, yes, FDA, we believe that GE foods should be labeled. And to date, the FDA still has not responded to that petition. So legally, they are required to respond to our legal petition. And, to the 1.2 million people that have said they want GE food labeling, so we're still waiting for a response from the FDA. And I think that's one reason why Senator Boxer and Representative DeFazio introduced the federal legislation is to, since FDA is not acting, that they wanted to pressure FDA. And the good news is they've gotten many legislative co-sponsors for their bill, many more than we've ever seen in the past. So we definitely are seeing more legislators interested in this issue, and we're pretty confident that at some point there will be action at the federal level.
Yes, I'm feeling hopeful as well. I don't think it can go on the way it is for very much longer. So you have on your website, you have various petitions that we can sign and get more information on these issues. Can you tell us about some other campaigns that you've got going now, and how important consumer pressure is?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that. It's incredibly important that the public make their opinions known about how our food is produced and about how we're impacting the environment and how this impacts our families and our children. So on our website, we do have a lot of actions, not only supporting legislation, but also petitions on GE labeling and other issues. And it's so critical for that our agencies, our federal agencies, our state legislators, and our federal legislators know and hear from their constituents about what people want. That's really how we make change. So if we really do want to see change in how our food is produced, we really do need to take action. And fortunately, our website's really easy, and it's really easy to sign these petitions and to send comments directly to your legislator. So some other issues that we're working on, we also have a campaign to protect honeybees. So it's a campaign on honeybees and pesticides. And I'm sure that a lot of people know that bees are critical for our food supply. In fact, 1 out of every 3 bites of food we eat is from a crop that's pollinated by honeybees. But over the past decade, we are seeing bee populations across the world dying. Some people know it's called colony collapse disorder. And also during this time, we've seen more and more peer-reviewed studies linking these bee declines to pesticide use, and specifically certain classes of pesticide use. And in fact, the European Union has banned some of these pesticides because of the impacts it's having on bees and other pollinators. So here in the U.S., Center for Food Safety, we recently filed a lawsuit against EPA because it is not taking action to protect the bees against these toxic pesticides, and that lawsuit is in process. There's federal legislation called the Pollinator Protection Act, and that was recently introduced, and it's another way. Center for Food Safety, we try to take things from multiple angles. So we try to get things changed either through the courts or through legislations or through corporate change. So the legislation, the Pollinator Protection Act, is another way to get these pesticides banned. So again, you can go to our website and write your federal legislator to support the Pollinator Protection Act. And this would be a great way to reduce pesticide use and hopefully save the bees.
I remember when several of the European countries, one by one, started to ban the certain pesticide that they thought was causing the problem with the bees. And I believe they're not having the problems that we are. They're not experiencing the colony collapse at the levels that we are. So I'm glad that you're doing this work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely, hopefully, that evidence, we'll be able to cite that evidence, and that will encourage our federal agencies, EPA, to take action, because we need to take action soon where there aren't enough bees to pollinate. For example, there's a lot of concern about the almond crop here in California. It's one of the largest crops here in California, and it's highly dependent on pollinators, and there has been a shortage of bees available to pollinate these crops, and it's a real concern within the almond industry. So it's not only to protect the bees, it's also to protect our farmers here in California that are reliant on these bees for their livelihoods.
And the farm workers that don't need the pesticides as well. So it's really full circle. If we take care of the bees, we're taking care of ourselves. So,
absolutely.
And how important they are to the food supply. Can you talk a little bit more about how important they are?
Yeah, just as I said, because they pollinate so much of our food, we're really completely reliant on them. So we can't produce food unless we have pollinators to pollinate our crops.
And I know you said 1 out of every 3 bites, so that's a pretty big percentage of our food supply.
Absolutely.
So I know another issue when we're at the stores and shopping and buying fish that we're always concerned about, what is that fish that we're buying. Can you talk about fish farms and GMO salmon and give us some guidance on buying fish and what are the health implications for our families?
Sure. Yeah, and I definitely, as a mother, I find that fish can be one of the most confusing things in the supermarket when you go in because, it's different depending on where you live and what the season is, and it definitely is hard to keep track of everything. In general, a lot of our fish are produced in fish farms, and you can think of it almost the same as you might think of a factory farm for animals or a CAFO. So it's a lot of fish, in a net pen, in the water, all crammed together. And so when you are raising fish in that unhealthy way, you end up having to use antibiotics for faster growth and also to prevent disease because all these fish are living together in such a closed space. And then you also have to use pesticides in order to keep pests off the fish and to keep them healthy. And so there's a lot of chemicals that are going into these fish farms, and also the feed that these fish are being fed. It's obviously, not natural. It's produced, and a lot of that feed contains genetically engineered corn or soy. So these fish are really not anything like our wild fish in the ocean. So there are a lot of concerns for human health and also for the environment. These fish can also escape from their pens, and they can threaten native wild fish populations. They can also spread deadly diseases and parasites to wild fish. So it really is a concern. So that being said, we tend to, Center for Food Safety, to encourage people to eat wild fish moderately when they can. So that includes wild salmon, which means salmon from Alaska or the Pacific. All Atlantic salmon is farmed. Other wild fishes that are quote-unquote good choices are wild halibut, rockfish, sardines, albacore tuna, although you want to eat tuna in moderation because of mercury levels. And then for people, there are some organizations that do support farmed fish, and there are best choices for that as well, such as farmed catfish or farmed cod, and there are several good guides out there for sustainable seafoods, and the one that I like is the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Sustainable Food Guide. That's a really great guide for sustainable fish, and I actually have it downloaded on an app on my phone. And it's one of those things that you really do because the fish season changes all the time. When you're in the supermarket, it's really handy to have that.
Okay, I will. We'll provide that link for that app with your interview. Thank you very much for that. So we're hearing too a lot about nanotechnology these days, and wondering if it's affecting our food supply.
It is, and nanotechnology, again, is one of these new technologies. It's increasing rapidly. Its prevalence, its use is increasing rapidly. And because of that, our government really has not caught up to the new technology, and our government's not regulating the use of nanotechnology in food products, despite its widespread use, and there are serious public health concerns. So, for example, there are some nanomaterials into foods like dietary supplements and also food packaging and food contact substances. So that includes cutting boards or plastic containers, sandwich bags, and a lot of the use is to try to keep bacteria out of food. However, the concern, again, is that we don't know very much, if any, about the health effects of consuming these nanomaterials. However, we have seen evidence that nanomaterials can pose health risks if they're inhaled or ingested or spread on the skin. And so our government is really behind in terms of regulating these products, and until they're adequately tested, we do recommend that people avoid them. We are pushing, again, for labeling of these products, and in the meantime, just trying to avoid anything that says, if it's a food product that contains it might say nano silver or antibacterial properties, things like that. They're kind of little trigger words that we're trying to avoid. But right now it's very hard to know if it's in our food packaging. But we are working at the federal level to try to change that pretty quickly.
Has Europe taken any steps in that direction with nanotechnology? Labeling it or prohibiting it, either way?
We're definitely taking action at the federal level, and we're currently in process of working on our strategy at the federal level.
But have you seen the European Union doing anything in regards to labeling or prohibiting?
Yeah, Europe and Canada are actually taking steps to limit the use of nanotechnology in food, and so far the U.S. has issued draft guidelines to companies, but actually hasn't established any regulations or limits. So again, it's another area that we are seeing other countries such as Europe take more preventative steps in this area, and the U.S. is once again lagging behind.
But at least there's probably more studies, and we have more evidence. If the other countries are already moving in that direction, it's always helpful to know that change is coming down the line. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Well, thank you very much for educating us about these issues that are so important to us and our family and for our health and our certainly for our health care. Trying to link some of our chronic diseases to some of these food issues I think it's happening, but we certainly need more guidance. I think the work that your organization does is critical for all of us. So,
well, great. Thank you so much.
You have several free reports available to folks, and we're going to put links up for them. It's the Center for FoodSafety.org, and you have a free report, Help the Honeybee, a list of toxic garden products to avoid. You have Avoid Genetically Engineered Fish. You have a guide for that as well. And you have another one that I really like. It's Cool Foods, Cool Facts, bite-sized information about how what you eat affects the climate. And, that's something that that elementary school children can understand. I really love that. It's great to put on the refrigerator.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah, and we also do have online our shopper's guide to foods produced without GMOs. And we do also have an app available that it's available now, but we're also going to be updating it, making it better. But it's all available on our website right now.
Oh, perfect. Okay, I'm going to put that link up there as well. And you've got another page with the Take Action campaigns for petitions that everybody can sign. I think that's so important. Thank you very much for doing the legal work that your organization does.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
It takes all of those pieces, and I think you're certainly making a dent in it, and we all appreciate it. So thank you again, Rebecca Spector, West Coast Director for the Center for Food Safety, a national nonprofit organization working to protect human health and the environment by curbing the use of harmful food production technologies and by promoting organic and other forms of sustainable agriculture. This is a journey. It's a personal journey going green and a collective one, and you may want to invite your family and friends to listen in to this interview as well. Our experts provide a wealth of information as well as tips and tools for going green. I hope you will take the time to make leaning into green a priority in your life, and I hope we've inspired you today to go green in many new and rewarding ways. Let us be the wave of reason and keep listening as we all lean into green a little deeper in our collective quest towards sustainability. Bye for now.